On behalf of RBCS and software test professionals, welcome to this webinar. I'm moving from a feared enforcer to a trusted partner. I'm Rex Black. I'm president of RBCS. We are a worldwide testing and quality assurance firm. We have clients that range from small startups to Fortune 20 global enterprises. We've been in business since 1994, delivering insight and confidence to hundreds of clients around the world. Our team of international consultants deliver customized training, consulting, and outsourcing services for companies that want to improve their testing and quality assurance practices. I'm the author of 10 books. I won't bore you with all the titles. One is the bestseller, Managing the Testing Process, been out for 13 years. And I also have a couple new ebooks, Testing Metrics, Measuring Product, Process, and Project Quality, and Improving the Testing Process, a value-based approach to assessing and enhancing testing maturity. Those are both available through our website and will shortly be available through Amazon. RBCS is presenting this webinar in partnership with Software Test Professionals. You can check out their website at softwaretestpro.com. Attending today's webinar may earn you credit for QAI and or ASQ recertification, so check with QAI or ASQ to determine how to qualify. This typically involves saving that attendee email that you receive after this webinar. Attendance at today's webinar definitely will earn you PMI PDUs if you're interested. Thank you to Vicki Sasser for reviewing the material for PDU status and for making valuable suggestions on how to improve the materials. Visit pmi.org to claim the PDUs and use code FETP100. That's FETP100. RBCS's provider ID is 2986. Please note the PDUs are available for live webinar attendance only. Excuse me. Before we start the presentation, some housekeeping notes. If you have any questions, you can submit them at any time, but please note that I only look at those questions at the end, so I cannot interact directly during the presentation. Now, the common question always comes up, where can I find a copy of this presentation? It's on rbcs-us.com. Navigate to the resource tab in the upper middle, and then pull that down and navigate to the basic library, and you'll find it at the very bottom in PDF format. The other question that sometimes comes up is, how do I get registered for the free e-learning drawing? Well, you're here. If you're attending live rather than listening to a recording of this, you are entered in the drawing. So check your email over the next couple days and watch the spam filter. You do have a limited amount of time to respond. Now, if you are having any problems with the audio or visual components of this webinar, contact GoToWebinar support. Now, short term, usually what happens is if the audio is weird, is not like very low, generally that's an audio setting that can be fixed. So try modifying your audio settings on your computer. If you can't get to the webinar at all and you're just hearing me via phone and you're wondering why can't I get to the webinar, that's almost always a firewall problem. Company firewall will prevent you from getting through, and there's not much can be done about that other than ask people to change the security settings. Sometimes the problem is actually browser incompatibility, so if you're unable to access the webinar, that's another thing to try, is a different browser. So I hope you enjoy this free webinar from RBCS. We do these as a service to the software testing community because at RBCS we are a not just for-profit company. Now, today's presentation is about positive and negative relationships between testers and their various stakeholders. Now, these relationships are critical success factors for testing groups. We've seen groups flourish when they attend to these relationships and do very badly when they do not. You'd think that this would be something that a lot of people would be aware of, but in fact it is often under-recognized. So today what I want to do is give you some ideas about what kinds of problems can arise in terms of the relationships, and then some thoughts on how to address those, illustrated with some case studies as we go along. Let's see, why is this not advancing? There we go. So question to ask yourself, how's your relationship with your stakeholders? Do you know? Do you care? No. If you don't care, you should. If you don't know, you should, because the good relationships, as I said, can be the difference between success and failure for test teams. We've seen this with a number of clients where bad relationships break out, between test team and everybody else in the organization, or select other people in the organization, and that leads to the downfall of the test team. Now, sometimes people think that adversarial relationship is actually necessary. It's something they have to do. But if you think of yourself as some kind of enforcer, and I'll get into this, what the feared enforcer roles are in a minute. If you think your job is to make people do the right thing or ship the right product or what have you, then you're in an enforcing role, and that's not likely to be very popular. And nor even if you say, I don't care about popularity, I'm here to do work, and whether people like me or not is that's immaterial. Well, actually, it is material, because the test team is really there providing services to the organization, and the service organization that is deeply disliked and distrusted is not one that's long for that to retain its place, I guess you could say, in the organization. So an alternative to being seen as this feared enforcer is to instead see yourself as a trusted partner that helps the organization achieve important quality-related objectives. And the test team works closely, hence partnership, with the other stakeholder groups to try to achieve that success, to support that success. And not only does a successful test team do that as a trusted partner, but it actually is also seen as a trusted partner. The point I'm making is that there is a perception element to this puzzle, as it were, and it's not enough to just have your heart in the right place, as the saying goes, but you actually have to have it clear to people that that's what you're doing. So let's see what we're talking about here with the feared enforcer situation, and then how we get away from that, move away from the feared enforcer. So there are three fairly typical tester-stakeholder relationship dysfunctions that we've seen with a number of our clients, assessments around the world and for years. One is the process cop, the person who wants to make sure that the organization follows the rules as it sees the rules. Another is the quality cop, which is less concerned about how the work gets done, but is more concerned about that the deliverables, the software being released, meets their particular standards for quality, what the quality should be. We're trying to enforce level quality standards. And then the last is the clash of the titans, is basically the ego conflicts between test managers and other managers, peer level managers. Now I want to point out, I'm not bringing these up as categories like say, okay, you have to like place yourself or someone into one of those three categories. Someone can actually be in all three of those categories at once. In one particularly unfortunate situation, we saw a director of a test group that was in all three of those situations, and he wasn't the director of that test group for much longer after we saw him in that role. The level of conflict was such that he ended up being removed and invited to pursue other opportunities, as the euphemism goes. So yeah, you can be a process cop, a quality cop, and involved in an ego conflict all at the same time. Or you could just fall into one of those buckets, or you could have more of one and less of another. Or if you're lucky, you don't have any of those at this point. Let's look at these a little further here. We start with a process cop. So, as I said, the process cop is a test organization or a test manager who's really focused on making sure that a defined process is followed, that best practices in software engineering are adhered to throughout. So you can see the illustration here. We've got the cop, okay, it's a little checkbox of here's what you did wrong. Now, is the process that's being enforced something that's defined by the process cop, or is it something that's defined externally, given to the process cop? It turns out it doesn't much matter. There's a psychological phenomenon that I've talked about in a previous webinar called projection, which is where you project onto someone or something how you feel about someone or something else. And that's something that's going to happen in this situation, that if you're enforcing the process, even if you didn't create the process yourself, even if you were given the process by senior management or something, and the perception is likely to be, well, it's you're the one who's causing me the problem, from the stakeholder who's being ticketed, as it were. So that's a separate question that's brought up there too. Like, well, what if I'm asked to do this? So we'll get back into that in a minute. But for the moment, whether you define the process and enforce it, or whether you're given a process and you're enforcing it, either way, you could end up in a process cop role. And something is fairly typical to hear from the process cop perspective is somebody saying something like this: without a waiver from the CIO, Chief Information Officer, you can't skip the code review. There's a process for deviating from the process, and even that process is enforced. So at any time, if you find yourself in a position where you are enforcing best software engineering practices on people in another group, then you're falling into this process cop role. So very common examples would be, if you are asked to, or you just voluntarily go out and on audit activities that are managed by other groups, that's definitely process cop stuff. Require things, checklists be satisfied before project moves from one phase to the next. That's more process cop stuff. Sort of a mindset is this poster that you sometimes see of: a failure to plan on your part does not constitute a crisis on my part, which is basically like, look, you don't follow the process, you don't plan and here, then that's going to be your problem, not mine. Definitely sending a I'm not a team player message in a number of ways. Now, sometimes people will kind of resist this when I'm critiquing this role and say, yeah, but if there's no process, then we're just going to have chaos. Anything goes. And well, okay, that's true, but is it actually your job to prevent chaos? Is that what the test manager's role is? If it is, if you're protesting now, saying, yes, Rex, it is, I was told specifically that that's what I was to do, then who told you, and why, and what's the motivation here? So, for example, if you were told by a CIO, you're brought in as a director of testing, you're told by the CIO, you need to be the process cop, you need to make sure that these rules are followed. Does everybody know that that's your job? Do you have the political support for that? When somebody gets unhappy and when process gets in the way of a timely deliverable, what happens next? Do you get the kind of support that you would need to push back on that? And why would it be a test manager's job anyway? I mean, there in some industries you see things called independent verification and validation, and managers that are in charge of that. They're doing some auditing, based on externally provided rules, but they're not test managers. So how did this end up being a test manager job, right? So important to ask this question. Now, if you've just appointed yourself to it, then of course this is really dangerous, because you'll obviously have no political support, and when the process gets in the way of company priorities, you're going to be basically standing athwart the organization's objectives, and always a dangerous place to be. So that's the process cop. Now, the quality cop, this is someone who is not necessarily as concerned about process, as I said before, but is more concerned about quality-based entry and exit criteria of saying, look, this is what the product means, what the product needs to be good enough for release, this we're going to enforce this or try to enforce this. We've seen situations where, to give you a very specific example, one of attendees at one of our training courses once made a comment to me. I was the instructor on that particular course, and he said, the most successful project I ever worked on was one where I managed to get the project canceled because get the release canceled because the quality was so bad. And I thought, that's a really curious perspective to think of that as success. Obviously, the project failed, and testing is part of the project. But this fellow has defined success or failure for him as independent success or failure of the team that he's part of, the organization he's part of. How does that work? Now, obviously, that's not the kind of thing that's likely to win you a lot of friends. Now, those kind of arguments from people that I've heard, and I've heard a number of people espousing this, that test managers should have the power to stop the release. And I always kind of say, well, really, do you want that power to stop the release? Why would you want that? Why would you want to be in that position where you had to be the conscience of the organization, and that basically you were the only one who had to worry about quality, and everybody else was free to just sort of have whatever priorities they want? Because that's sort of what's being said here. If we're responsible for deciding whether a release goes or not based on quality, then doesn't that kind of allow other people to abdicate? So how would you recognize that you're in a quality cop role? Well, again, the classic indicator here is this trying to stop or succeeding in stopping a release, and particularly if the test team is the only team that's saying we shouldn't release this. That's one thing to advise. That's one thing to inform. But what I'm talking about here is actually trying to invoke an authority. Now, similarly, if you're saying, our mission, our organization's test team's mission is to defend the user from bad releases. We're the people that care about quality here in this organization. Then, again, this sets up a scenario where essentially you're inviting others to abdicate their role in quality. Now, again, this is another thing. I say this and I'll get some amount of pushback, and people will say, yeah, but we need to release quality software, and somebody needs to be the conscience of the organization. Well, okay, agreed. Releasing quality software is important, but why is it that a adversarial relationship between testing and the rest of the project team is necessary to achieve that? Is that actually true? That without a conscience, without somebody basically pushing on the organization and scolding the organization for trying to release something that wasn't ready, that it would do it anyway? Wouldn't it be more effective to inform people or persuade people? I think part of the problem here is that there's a frustration that arises of test managers and test groups don't necessarily report their results in particularly effective ways. It's something I've covered before, of how to report results in a more effective way. Topic of my book on testing metrics in part. So they don't report their results in an effective way. They understand the bad quality of the software, but other groups do not understand it. And so as a sort of an attempt to substitute for the inability to inform or persuade, there's just let me make the decision about whether the quality is good enough. And this is kind of like augury or something, where the test manager is off reading sheep in trails or burning turtlebacks or whatever form of augury you want to think about. and looking at these obscure signs and saying, signs point to bad release, signs point to dissatisfied customer. No, what we really want to do is be able to inform people and persuade them and say, look, this is why we're concerned. This is sometimes referred to as bringing people to your reality. If your reality is the software is bad and there's a lot of problems in it, then the way to bring them to your reality is to show them why, show them the evidence that says it is bad. Okay, and then we have the final feared enforcer dynamic here, which is often compounded with the other two, brought on, I think, by one of the other two or both of the other two. And this is Clash of the Titans. I'm talking about here is, an actual conflict that exists between the test manager and one or the other of the stakeholder, one or more of the other stakeholder managers. And this is it's kind of a typical quote here, is you hear test managers say of some other manager, God, that person's a complete idiot. Or you hear somebody say that of the test manager, or both. They're each is saying that of the other. Associates and I did an assessment of organization once, and everybody we talked to who was not in the testing organization, we said, what's the value of testing? And they would say, testing has no value. Those people are just obstacles. They get in the way. And then, we talked to people in the testing group, and okay, what's the role of the other stakeholders in quality? And they would just snort and say, geez, they have no role in quality. These people are a complete disaster. If we weren't here, these guys would be breaking production every other day. It's only through our constant beatings on them that they manage to get anything out there that halfway works. Now, so obviously there's a quality cop element in there, but there's also a very pronounced Clash of the Titans problem of people are upset at each other, and they think they're doing their job, but the reality is that they're just engaged in a massive conflict with somebody, which is counterproductive to what they're trying to accomplish. Now, how would you recognize that you are personally involved in the Clash of the Titans? Well, you might already. I mean, if you are, and if you like, well, I actually have called one of my peer managers an idiot recently. It's like, well, okay. Or is there another manager that you would not go out to lunch with them? If they came and asked you to eat lunch with them, that you would refuse under pretty much all circumstances. Only if your boss were to order you to go out to lunch with them that you would do that. That's sort of a Clash of the Titans warning sign. Or alternatively, if you deliberately try to avoid going near some other person, another manager, because you're just like, I just don't want to deal with that moron. I can't be bothered to have a conversation with that person. Or conversely, if you deliberately go through some other manager's area when you're walking somewhere, you're walking past and looking to kind of beard your opponent in his den. This can also be an indication. If you're either avoiding someone because you're worried about having some conversation with them that you will find irritating or what have you, or if you are seeking out confrontation with someone deliberately to try to make them look foolish, then those are symptoms of a personality conflict between you and one of your peer managers. Now, the thing to keep in mind about these sort of situations is, it's much easier to avoid a bad relationship than to fix a bad relationship. Relationships, once broken, are very difficult to repair. And we've certainly seen scenarios with clients where the level of distrust that exists between the test team and one or more of the other teams is such that they will not collaborate. I remember reporting to a CIO once, and we'd finished an assessment, and giving him the summary, and he asked me for, what's the short version, and I said, well, I hate to use cliches, but there's good news and there's bad news. And the good news is that from a purely sort of benchmark type of perspective, we look at capability of your testing and quality operation with respect to industry best practices. You're quite good, and really conceivably 18 to 24 months away from being excellent. And some fairly straightforward improvements would push you into that really excellent category. And he said, well, that's great. What's the bad news? I said, the bad news is that you can't get there with the team that you've got. That the people that you've got in key management positions right now would rather argue with each other and be right at the expense of the other than collaborate to make improvements. And I said, well, okay, well, what if we just got rid of the top managers? And I said, we'll replace them with who? And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, you go down to the next level below the top managers, the directors, you go down to the senior managers. They're all embroiled in this conflict as well. If you go down to the line managers, they're not. They're busy trying to make things work, and for the most part, they could conceivably put this behind them. But the problem is that they've not been, in any sense, groomed to go into these positions. Unfortunately not, because if they were, then the grooming that they would have received would have all been about how they should mistrust their colleagues, and they would basically be pointed in a bad direction. So this is obviously a very negative situation to fall into, where you're doing good work, and in this case really pretty much everybody was doing pretty good work from a quality point of view. But there was no way to get people to work together to get better. Okay, so tales of woe, sadness, gnashing of teeth, etc. So what do we do? How do we avoid this? Well, you might say, a lot of this stuff sounds like it's kind of how to win friends and influence people breakdowns of one kind or another. So maybe, that's what I need to do is a Dale Carnegie course or something like that and cultivate some winning personality. Well, yeah, I suppose, though, the test managers that I've worked with and that my associates and I have done assessments on that have been successful, I would not consider those people to be glad-handers in any sense of the word. They're not. They're not. They're certainly not. Antisocial or unremittingly negative or unpleasant by any means. But they're not like salesman of the year, saleswoman of the year types. But what they do, the pattern that my associates and I have seen with these successful test managers that manage to have these good relationships is that there's basically 5 key things that they are carrying out. They know their stakeholders. The stakeholders know them. They know what their stakeholders want. They have a clearly defined mission and what it would mean to succeed at that mission. They walk the walk. In other words, they act on that mission at all times, and they follow up to make sure that they are succeeding. So let's take a look here. So at the beginning of this presentation, I made a comment about, how's your relationship with your stakeholders? I asked you that question, or asked you to ask yourself that question. How's your relationship with stakeholders? Now, if you were sitting back going, what is he talking about? What stakeholder? What is a stakeholder? Okay, now it's not somebody who's holding a piece of prime rib or a filet mignon. It's somebody who has some sort of interest in testing and the quality of the system. They have a stake in the outcome of your testing. Now, that said, you could say, okay, clearly my manager, the person I report to, is a stakeholder. Yep, definitely. But that's probably not the only stakeholder. It's definitely not the only stakeholder. So you think of developers. Developers are technical stakeholders. Now, what do I mean by a technical stakeholder? I mean somebody whose primary perspective is on the technical elements of solving the problem that the system solves. So developers, they're stakeholders because they consume one of our most important products, bug reports, information about how the software doesn't work. Development managers need to get that same information, and often they need to be informed about trends and in the failures that we're seeing. Database and system architects, again, need to understand our results and what they mean. Technical support people often want to know, hey, how's the testing going? Are you testing these important elements? And there are also business stakeholders. So there's sales and marketing people, there's business analysts, project managers, sales staff, senior executives, technical documentation staff, users, customers, basically people who are interested in the, not so much the how the problem gets solved, which is the technical stakeholders' perspective, but that the problem gets solved. And do we truly understand the problem to be solved? Now, this is just a partial list. Not all of these entities might exist where you are, and you also might find that there are some additional entities that are not on this list. I'm not trying to be exhaustive here by any means, just to get you thinking. So what I want you to think about is, who are the stakeholders, and try to identify them. Now, once you've identified them, that's great. You know who they are. Now you need to get to know them. You need to establish a relationship with these people. Now, you might say, well, Rex, I've got kind of a problem here because I'm already in sort of a feared enforcer role. I've got a relationship with most of these people, but it's not very good. Okay, well, now you have to try to repair it, rehabilitate it. Now, some cases, this interesting thing, we just saw this recently with a client where the incoming director of testing was taking over after somebody had been in that role before, and the person who was in that role before was a real feared enforcer type. He was a process cop, he was a quality cop, and he was involved in a real clash of the titans. He came in and just said, this is the way that things need to be done, just told people, you got to do this. This is the way it has to be. And in the course of about 9 months, managed to pretty much alienate everybody. And at that point, he was let go. So they bring in somebody from outside of the testing group. There's a certain level of distrust that the testing group might have been infected by that attitude. So they bring in a director of development to move over and take over that role. And he got this part right from the start, that first things first, let me figure out who it is that I'm supposed to be helping, and make sure that they know that I'm there to help them. And so immediately started reaching out and establishing connections. Now, he had sort of an advantage in the sense that he was not the feared enforcer. People were glad to see him in that role. But at the same time, there was a certain level of, I'm not going to say distrust, but, wariness, I guess you could say, that, well, he's the new guy. We're going to give him a shot. We're going to give him a chance. We're going to give him the benefit of the doubt. But, we've got this negative history, and, we're not going to forget that that's out there. So, even if you are in that position where you're coming in replacing somebody who's been in that feared enforcer role before, understand that, yeah, it wasn't you, but it was probably parts of your team. And even if it wasn't you or parts of your team, even if you're a whole new operation coming into that situation, people develop stereotypes about testing groups, and the bad stereotype, unfortunately, all too prevalent, is from the outside looking in that people see testing groups as being comprised of these nitpicky, beside the point, unpleasant individuals. Now, I'm not saying that that's a fair stereotype by any means, but the cliche about a few bad apples spoiling the whole barrel definitely applies here. That my experience has been that it only takes one or two encounters with testing groups like that for people to come to the conclusion that, that's just what testing is about. So you need to make sure that you're effectively rehabilitating that perception. Okay, you got to know your stakeholders. You also have to know what they want. What are their objectives? Okay, there are stakeholders. Why are they stakeholders? What objectives are they looking for you to achieve for them? Now, I can't give you an exhaustive list here, just like I can't really give you an exhaustive list of who the stakeholders are, but I can give you some ideas. Certainly, what we see, very, very common objectives one would be finding bugs. People want us to find bugs, and of course they're kind of conflicted here, right? I mean, they want us to find bugs, but they don't want us to find bugs. I mean, people are generally not happy about bugs, but they're happier that we find the bugs before release and the customers find them. They definitely want to have us find the important bugs. Now, this is it's kind of a funny thing here, and you can rail against the vagaries of human blame placing, if you will, on this one. But you ever notice that when a customer finds a bug in production or in the sales in software that's being sold, or web software, and they report it, it's not unusual for someone to come to the test manager and say, "Why didn't you guys find that in testing?" Though you almost never hear someone say to the development manager, "Why did your developers put that bug in there?" I mean, it's funny, and it's not not necessarily funny in a humorous way, but funny in a strange way. That's the way the human brain works. But it's true, they do want us to find bugs, and they want us to find especially the important bugs. Now you might say, yeah, that thing about why didn't you find that? That can be a problem. Well, we'll talk more about that on the next slide to get into that issue of what can and can't be done in a moment. Now, another thing that people want is confidence in the system. I had one development manager tell me once during an assessment. I asked him one of my fairly typical assessment questions: does testing have any value here? What's the value of testing? So, testing is extremely valuable. And I said, "Oh, that's great. Why do you feel that way?" He said, "Well, because when we go into production, every now and then I'll have these moments of doubt, but then I realize, oh no, I don't need to worry. I can be confident because I know that our test team has done a fine job of testing it. He has a lot of confidence in them, which allows him to have confidence in the product." Now that quote, that comment right there about having great, I don't have to worry about that. I've got confidence. That's the kind of thing you hear when you're talking to a stakeholder in a situation where the test team has successfully become a trusted partner. Those are the kind of comments that that come from a test team's trusted partners. Not, "Oh, those people are obstacles, those people are in the way." So no, those people give me the confidence to release the software I develop. Now, another thing that people often want, and I alluded to this on the previous slide, is they want insight. They want information. They want to understand what's going on. I don't want it to be, as I made the joke earlier about, some testing results is like some form of augury, and reading the future of the software in sheep entrails or turtlebacks. That's not what people want. What people want is clear intelligible information delivered in a timely fashion that allows them to make smart decisions about what should we do next. And this gets to the quality cop thing, as I was alluding to before. If you can show people why the quality is not good enough, if you can give them facts, you can bring them along. Now, it's not a discussion that you're going to win every time if you think that quality is not good enough. But, I've personally been involved in a number of release decisions where I was able to point out information and say, look, guys, this trend is not our friend here. We're continuing to discover defects, and if we go live, then all the defects that we've yet to discover are still in the product, and they're going to be out there, and the customers are going to find them, and do we really want that? So you got to give people insight into what you're talking about. It can't just, you can't just sit back and say, it'd be a really bad idea to release this software right now. Something bad's going to happen to us. You have to be a little more compelling than that. Excuse me. So understand the information needs. This is something I've talked about in other webinars, and you can find recordings of those on our digital library if you want to listen to them. And then another objective is, for you to reduce the risk of a failure in production. Help to reduce the risk. Can't reduce it to zero, but you can definitely reduce it. And a lot of mature managers will understand, there is no project without risk. There is no software that has no risk of failure. There is such a thing as acceptable risk. Now, the thing to keep in mind about this is that stakeholders, this is not necessarily something that they're used to talking about. What do you want from testing? So, when you just show up, let's say you've gone through this process, you've identified your stakeholders, you've asked to set up an appointment to have a conversation with them. You sit down with them and you say, hey, let's talk about what I do and how it relates to what you need, what your objectives are. This is not something that they've likely spent a lot of time thinking about. They might have, but when we do assessments, this is what we ask people outside of the test teams all the time. Well, what's the objective of testing? What's testing there to accomplish? And they usually haven't really thought this through very carefully. So help them. Come with this list of 4 things and go through and use that to structure the discussion. Now, don't use it to limit the discussion. Use it as a starting point, a jumping off point to lead to more discussion. There might be other objectives out there. Now, I think one thing you'll find very enlightening about this when you do it is listen to see if anybody says, I want you to be a process cop, or I want you to be a quality cop. I want you to force me to do things that I would not otherwise do. That's process cop. Or I want you to prevent me from releasing software that I already know shouldn't be released. That would be the quality cop. I'm not going to say you'll never hear that, but it's very unusual that you'll hear that. In years of doing assessments, only remember a very few number of times when people said that's what the test team was for. And in every one of those cases that I can recall, it was actually a senior manager. My response was in those cases, in most of these assessments, well, why is that their job to be the process cop? You're the manager in charge here. It would seem more like it's your job. If you want people to work in a particular way, rather than delegating your enforcement responsibilities, as it were, to a peer of the person that you're trying to influence, why wouldn't you just do that yourself? It's not something that you're likely to hear from a peer level manager at all, really I think shows up why that whole process cop and quality cop role or roles are such losers, because nobody wants that. Very, very few people want that. Now, This leads us to a particular caveat here, which is sometimes what they want you can't give them, you can't deliver. So back to the point I was making before about why didn't you guys find that in testing? Well, why did the development manager have his developers put it in there? Of course, the development manager didn't have his developers put it in there. It was a mistake, and same thing. It's software development is a fallible process, results in bugs, and testing is likewise a fallible process, and can't find everything. You're not going to be able to predict with perfect accuracy where all the bugs are, so you certainly can't go in and test those areas, and you can't test everything, which is what you'd have to do if you didn't know where the bugs were and wanted to be sure you could find every bug. So you cannot find all the bugs before the software ships. So if that's what somebody's asking you to do, then that's going to be a problem. Somebody says, well, we want to make sure that there's never any regression process. All of the functionality that we've delivered before the customers have is working, continues to work. So you're not going to be able to do this. So let's say you're sitting in a conversation with a stakeholder, and out pops one of these unachievable objectives. What do you do? Well, one thing you could do is push back really hard, say, no, that's impossible. Everybody knows that's impossible. We can't do that. The thing is that's going to lead to Clash of the Titans, right? That's because now you're adopting there's a communication style here called parent-child. Basically, you're lecturing them about this can't be, and usually the response that you're going to get out of that is that the person's going to want to push back and say no, no, it's not. You're not the parent, and I'm the child. It's the other way around. I'm the parent, you're the child. You came here to ask me what you wanted, what I wanted you to do. I'm telling you. So now, boom, you're into Clash of the Titans again. Okay, well, step back from that situation for a moment and say, well, why are they asking for this? So one reason could be that they just really honestly don't know that you can't do that. Another could be that these stakeholders are unhappy. They know that you can't get this, but they're unhappy. They're unhappy with you. They're unhappy with your predecessor. There's been process cop, Clash of the Titans stuff. So they're basically going to play this tactically. It's like a bluff, right? You want to talk to me about what I want you to do? Well, I'm going to ask you to do something you can't do. You can't achieve. See, you're a failure. So it could be that there's some sort of tactic there. So what I would recommend that, you remember you're trying to build this relationship. You don't want this encounter with the stakeholder to ironically result in actual damage or further damage to the relationship. So what I would say is, say, oh, okay, well, let me take that down as good input, and you tell them, well, we'll go off, we'll look into this, we're going to come back with a plan, and you will. I mean, because all of this discussion is leading to the point of defining the mission, and that's the point where you can actually do the educating. But in this initial discussion where you're trying to get out of people what they want, you don't want to be you don't want that to be lead to a confrontation. Excuse me. So based on the input that you've received from your stakeholders, then you should go off and define your mission. Now the thing, mission statement, these kinds of phrases have gotten pretty badly mauled by folks like me, I suppose, consultants, you would say, over the years, and you get a lot of meaningless dribble. I'm not talking about meaningless dribble here. I'm talking about something that is crisp and actionable. Now, maybe you don't want to call it a mission statement, or you call it a test policy document. It's another name that you'll hear for this. But basically, what I'm going to suggest here is that you have three things. You have clearly defined objectives based on your brainstorming sessions that you did with your stakeholders. You've defined metrics that will allow you to measure the extent to which you have achieved those objectives in terms of being effective, being efficient, and satisfying the stakeholders. And then you have targets for those metrics that have been set, either from your current capability, which is baselining, or from industry best practices or industry typical practices, which would be benchmarking. You put this down, and whatever you want to call it, mission statement, test policy, whatever, keep it short. You should be able to do this on one page, maybe two, but one page is good, and certainly we've seen that. One of our clients recently that we're working with to do this, they have a very crisp set of, I think it's like 3 slides that they have this all boiled down to. Here's our objectives, here are our metrics that we're going to use to measure that. Now, with that document in place, now it's time to go back to the stakeholders as you promised before, and have the conversation, have the dialogue, confirm with them, this is what we're proposing, and this is how we're proposing to measure success. What do you think of that? Now, remember that we're talking about being a trusted partner, and this process, is achieving consensus on this mission and what it would mean to succeed, can be a little frustrating for those of us who are type A personality sorts that just like to drive through from initiation to successful conclusion. Yep, we started it, did it, finished it, it's done. That kind of attitude. It's certainly a good thing in some ways to be driven, to be goal oriented, and certainly it's served me well in some ways throughout my life to have that sort of personality. But it also can be a cause of problems when you're trying to collaborate with people, because if you get impatient with the process of reaching consensus and try to steamroller it, then you get to a situation where you're actually not building partnership, you're just back in Clash of the Titans mode. So bring your patience to this process. Now, once you've gotten that in place, now it's the walk the walk time. You've said what you were going to do. Got your defined objectives. So now I'm going to set the bar kind of high for you. But basically everything you and your team does from that point forward should be aligned with those objectives. It should support those objectives. Now, suppose that stuff's coming down to you from your managers or from your peers that doesn't have anything to do with those objectives, or kind of has something to do with those objectives, but kind of not. It's not quite aligned with it. So now it's time to do a little, analysis here. What's going on? Maybe there was a key stakeholder that you should have talked to that you didn't. You missed. Okay, that can be fixed, and then you got to figure out who that stakeholder was, get them involved, revise your mission, revise your metrics. The other thing is, did you perhaps mistake understanding for approval? So it could be that when you had a conversation with the stakeholders, a review meeting where you went over this mission statement, it could be that people looked at it and said, "Now I understand what that says. I don't agree with it, but I understand it." But maybe they didn't come out and say that. So did you actually get approval in the full sense of the word? Do people support that? Is it possible that people didn't understand? Maybe they didn't understand what the objectives were, what would be required to achieve those objectives. So, look at that. Look at that issue if you are getting sort of sidetracked. Now, let's suppose that you're not. Let's suppose that you're going along and you're doing the things that you've defined, and you're measuring them, and you're being effective, you're being efficient. are you necessarily succeeding? Well, maybe, maybe not. There's a service element to what we're doing in testing that you need to be aware of. In any sort of service role, satisfaction is important. You have to be satisfying someone. So I'll use the analogy that I sometimes use to try to illustrate this. Let's suppose that you're on your way to work and you're feeling a little tired, and you decide that what you need to deal with that is a little bit of caffeine. So you go into a nearby coffee shop, and you know what you want. So you go up to place your order, and turns out that what you want is actually on sale. It's half off today, so you're happy about that. You place the order, and there's very few people in there, and the person who's working to make the your cappuccino or latte or whatever is very efficient, and it's done. It's done in a moment and handed to you, and you get it, and it's hot, and it tastes exactly like you wanted it to, and you pay, and you walk out the door. So are you happy? Now, I think people at first blush would say, "Oh yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy. I got exactly what I wanted. I got my caffeine and a tasty delivery vehicle, and it was half of what I expected to pay for it, and it was done very quickly. Of course I'm happy." Well, maybe you are, maybe you're not. What if when you walked in there, yeah, the place was empty, but it's clear why it was empty, because it's dirty, and the person that was working that took your order, the cashier, is really surly and rude. It's like, "God, is that all you want? It's a good thing I don't work for tips," or some other sarcastic comment like that. And you look back at the guy who's working away on making your coffee, and yeah, he's quick, but he's got long hair, and it's dirty, and it's not in a net, and it's like falling all over the place. And then you, like, out of the corner of your eye, maybe you see a cockroach scurrying, and you could just be like going, "Whoa, this is horrible." And at that point, the whole flavor of the coffee and the fact that it was a bargain and the fact it was done quickly is all beside the point, just based on the noxiousness of your experience. And you might say, "Well, yeah, it's testing. It's not coffee shop. I mean, it's not, more utilitarian than that." Don't kid yourself on this point. I want to go back to a case study that I brought up earlier of the organization that ended up getting dissolved. I was talking about, the testing and quality was good by objective measures, but they couldn't work together with their peers to solve problems. And as I said, ultimately that group ended up getting dissolved. That was purely a matter of dissatisfaction. By all objective measures of effectiveness and efficiency, that test team was fine. But by the perspective of how did people feel about that situation, everybody was unhappy and everybody was dissatisfied. So satisfaction is key. Now, this walking the walk is doubly challenging if you're in a situation where there is a history of the feared enforcer stuff going on. People will be watching for backsliding. They will be expecting that, maybe you came in, replaced the feared enforcer with the best of intentions, but soon enough that, testing thing will surface again. That might be what people are thinking. Or maybe you were the feared enforcer and they're just, going, "Oh, yeah, the guy had a temporary change of heart, but hey, that old personality will reassert itself again, and we'll be back in the usual conflicts with the testing group." So you'll actually have to work pretty hard to prove that, no, this is real. We are different now. We are a different organization. Part of how you're going to do that is through follow-up. Reevaluating how you're doing with your stakeholders. So, every few months, check in with them. Now, you got to be the judge of what the right frequency is here. I mean, you're walking into the development manager's office every week and going, "How we doing? How we doing? How we doing?" That's likely to become annoying pretty quickly. She or he might end up wondering, is there some sort of insecurity over there in the test group that they have to keep asking me this? But you can do surveys. You use tools like SurveyMonkey, for example. Put together a survey that you send out, and be more specific than "how are we doing," right? You're talking about talking to the development manager, surveying the development manager. Ask things like, how are our bug reports? Do they include enough detail? Is there any additional information that you would like to see us include in our bug reports? You're talking to the project manager, ask specific information about the data and the information that you're providing. Ask for specific feedback about that. How are we doing in terms of keeping you informed? Do you understand the quality status of the product based on our reporting to you? Does it help you guide the project to success? Another thing that's good is frequent face-to-face communication. Again, it's not necessary to be a backslapper or glad-hander here, but go talk to people. Have regular face-to-face communication whenever possible with your fellow managers. Some of our clients, they send out internal newsletters letting people know about what testing is doing and how it's improving, and that can be effective as well. And use those metrics, evaluate those metrics, post the results, show that your objectives are being achieved or not. If you succeed, make that clear, but have this stuff posted and look, we found our defect detection effectiveness is 95%. Above our goal of 92.5. And thanks to everybody, the good collaboration we've gotten to achieve that. And if you make a mistake, you fall short of a metric, own that too, and say, okay, here's what we're doing to fix that. Here's how we're going to fix that. Here's how we're going to make it better. Keep in mind that this follow-up stuff, again, to the extent that there are broken relationships being mended here, this take longer than if you're coming into a clean situation, as it were. Okay, so some conclusions here before we go into Q&A. Certainly there's what I would consider sort of a pernicious myth about in testing some areas of it, that testing is about being a quality cop or about being a process cop. If I ask people that question, are you a quality cop or a process cop? Sometimes people fall for it, testers fall for it, and they deliberate carefully. Oh, I guess I'm a quality cop. Or then some of the ones will get clever and say both. And of course, the answer I'm really looking for is neither, because they don't want that. Your stakeholders don't want that. So, it's easy to say I'm a quality cop, I'm a process cop, but it's wrong in almost all circumstances to define your role that way. I suggest instead is that you look at, what do the stakeholders need you to do? Understand, define, fulfill those objectives from a effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction point of view. Now, this might seem like a lot of work, and it can be, certainly, but it can be done. We have a number of clients where this transformation has occurred. I have one client right now that's in the process of making this transformation, and it works. It takes some time, but you can do it. Even if you were the one who was in the feared enforcer role before, you can change that. We've seen that with clients. So, don't despair and go, oh, I've created this horrible relationship with my coworkers, and this can never get better. It can, and it will, if you're determined to do it. Okay, so as usual, I'll put up the advertisement here. I'll take questions. Let me get the question panel undocked. Yeah, okay. A minute while I deal with the joy of the UI here. Mary asks, are there examples of a test policy document available for viewing or download? I am pretty sure, Mary, that there is one posted. Where is it posted? Is it the basic? It's either in the basic library or the advanced library, one of the two. I would say go go take a look at those. So go to the rvcs-us.com website, go to the resources tab that's in the upper middle, and if you click on that, then that'll pull down a menu that'll allow you to find the library, and then from there you can go to the basic library or the advanced library. Look in one of those two places. I'm pretty sure you're going to find a example of that. I believe we have one posted there. Let's see. So Mel says, thanks for the informative session, Rex. Do you have any guidance about the approach to use when talking with a CIO who has put a test manager in that feared enforcer role without providing the necessary backup? That's a great question, Mel. It's a real problem. We saw this happen with a client once. We were doing some work with a development manager, kind of helping them get started doing unit testing, and we typically like to be do a little fact gathering before we start our projects. And so I asked the development manager, what do you think of the test manager? And he got up and closed the door of the room we were in, and said, she is a narcissistic dilettante, which is surely not meant as a compliment. I said, what exactly do you mean by that? So, well, she has no idea how to do testing properly, but feels free to come into my area and regularly harangue the development managers who report to me about they're not doing unit testing properly, and that's why they're finding all these bugs. And when she does that, it gets everybody so riled up, it takes me about a half an hour or so to get them calmed down and back on purpose. So I asked her about this indirectly. I said, do you feel like your role is to be a process cop in a sense and enforce process? She said, well, yeah. And I said, why is that? She said, well, the VP of development told me that was my job. And I said, well, can you, inform me a little bit more about how that came to be? She said, sure. I was put into this role, and I didn't actually have any experience as a test manager. I'm like, uh-oh, in my head. And so I went out and I got some books, and I read up on books on the internet, and I'm not sure which book. I should have drilled down into this, which book it was that gave her this idea. But she came to the conclusion that her job was to enforce quality through process, basically. And then she went to her VP and said, a summary of what she thought she'd gotten out of the books, and asked the guy, is this what you want me to do? And he said, yeah, I guess that's what you're supposed to do. Well, what didn't happen was that the VP didn't go to the development director and say, look, I've put her, the QA manager, in charge of making sure that we follow best practices, and so, you need to support her when she comes to you and tells you what you need to do. So, fraught with peril, the situation is, because that, I think, is not an uncommon scenario. The times where I have seen test managers cast as process cops or quality cops by CIOs or by senior managers, it's really been an abdication rather than a delegation. And the distinction I'm making there is, if it were a proper delegation, then the manager, the executive, the CIO or the VP or whoever, would take great care to make sure that all of the peers of that test manager knew that that was their role, and that team, the test team, would be staffed appropriately, and would be trained in how to carry out audits properly, and given an appropriate title, and independent verification and validation team or something like that. But I've just not seen that happen. So, I think, Mel, that the first thing I would try to do, if I felt that I had been put in that position, would be to try to talk my way out of it, essentially. Try to redefine my position as more of, providing the services that I mentioned before. Maybe you could say, look, we understand that the role is to follow best practices and to produce good quality software, but how can we do that in a way that doesn't involve enforcement, but rather involves persuasion, that rather involves, giving people the tools and the information they need to do a better job. If I couldn't get out of it that way, then I think instead what I would do is look at this issue of making sure that I got proper political support and training and so forth going into it. Still, I think it's a tough road, even with that support, and I'd be fairly apprehensive walking into it. So, Mel, I hope you've got your asbestos bodysuit ready to go, because it's definitely a flame attracting role. Luke says, you likened testing to a service, coffee. What if the tester does not provide the necessary information to fulfill the order? Indeed. Insufficient information from stakeholders is, of course, a bane of the test manager's existence. We had a situation once with a client where we were doing some testing for them, and their marketing staff gave us this list of requirements, and they were just hopelessly vague. It was like one page of stuff, and it was like, the system should allow the user to send and receive emails. That's like that statement. It's just made and nothing, no details. Like, really? Okay, like how big should the emails be? What format should they be? Mentioned something about attachments, but then it didn't define what kind of attachments were allowed. So we went around and around with the marketing guys trying to get clarification on this, asking them questions, and they would send us answers, and the answers ended up raising more questions than than had existed before. And the marketing people got irritated and went and complained to our point of contact and said, you got to get these test guys to stop pestering us with these questions. So the guy came and said, look, I understand that you're trying to get these guys to give you this information, but they're getting irritated. And I said, well, yeah, we're not trying to irritate them. We're trying to understand what their specific needs are for this product, so that when we're testing it, we can tell them whether they should or should not have confidence in it, and we find things are actually problems. And said, yeah, I understand that, but I just don't think you're going to get any further information out of them at this point. I think they've told you whatever they're going to tell you. I said, well, okay, that's fine, but you got to understand that we've done some estimates on how this is going to affect us, and our calculation is that we'll take probably about a 20% efficiency hit. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, basically it's either we're going to test 20% less, or we're going to have to charge you 20% more to do the testing, because we don't have the information we need to define the expected results of our tests at this point. And then it's there's going to be a lot of a process of discovery happening during test execution that's ideally wouldn't be happening. And so he thought about it. He said, yeah, you know what? I'd rather just pay you the extra 20% than try to teach these guys how to write good requirement specifications right now. And my response to that was, well, hey, we're a testing services provider. As long as your checks don't bounce, that's your decision. So what can you do? I mean, you can, if you don't have adequate information, I think you need to explain to someone why it's inadequate. You can't just say, well, that's not enough information. You have to be able to point out that this is what's wrong. Also, I think the other thing that's important to remember, Luke, is that you're trying to motivate someone to change. Think pain. Think pain. Pain is what motivates people to change. There's a rule of thumb in sales that says that people move away from pain 10 times faster than they move towards a desired situation. Yeah, we know this from our personal life day to day. I mean, everybody knows they should get exercise. Everybody knows they should floss their teeth. But the thing that tends to really grab people's attention and get them to the gym, there's nothing like a heart attack. Nothing like you know, a real health scare to suddenly put the fear of God into somebody. Oh man, I got to start working out or I'm going to die. Or, you know, nothing like 2 or 3 hours in a dentist chair, smelling, you know, drilling going on in your mouth to convince you, you know, flossing my teeth every day would really be a great idea, and I think I'm actually going to do it. Now, you don't have to, you know, give someone a heart attack or do a marathon man type of dental work session on them to get them to change here. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you're trying to get somebody to give you more information or to change their behavior in terms of how the behavior that's affecting testing, think about the pain that they are causing themselves, right? And put it to them that way. So that was the tactic I took in the situation I just gave example. You know, I said, look, it's going to take us about 20%. You're going to take about a 20% efficiency hit. It's going to cost you 20% more to get this software tested. Basically, I wasn't going to say, you know, it makes my testers sad and frustrated when they don't get the information they need, because that's my pain, and you know, nobody cares about my pain. But it's going to cost you 20% more. Well, okay, that's his pain. That's the client's pain, and you know, they got his attention. But notice that it didn't motivate change, because you know, he then had to balance the pain on the one hand of the 20% bigger checks versus the pain on the other hand of having to go back to the marketing guys and try to convince them to change their evil ways, as it were, and write good requirements, which he knew wasn't going to happen. So, you know, to some extent, we play the hand we're dealt, Luke. I think you just have to be able to measure the effect that hand has on your effectiveness, your efficiency, and you know, try to use that as the lever to motivate change. And sometimes it will, and sometimes it won't. See, Mike asks, can we get a soft copy of the presentation? I guess you might have joined a little late, Mike, but yeah, at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned that you can find it on the basic library. So if you go rbcs-us.com, go to the resource tab, which is kind of in the upper middle of the screen, pull that down, and go to the library, and then navigate to the basic library. You should find it in PDF format at the bottom of the basic library. Laugh out loud from Mel. Yeah, I'm glad you appreciate it, and I'm glad that you are able to laugh about that scenario, Mel, and hopefully you'll keep your sense of humor. And in all seriousness, I think having a sense of humor about some of the things that can come up in testing, especially if you can use that sense of humor effectively with your stakeholders, is you know, a big part of this. Can be a big part of being a trusted partner as well. You know, now you have to be laughing with them, not laughing at them. You know, laughing with your stakeholders, not laughing at them. But yeah, you know, to the extent that you can establish sort of a, you know, it's a crazy world and we're just all doing our best in it, and it's kind of funny perspective with your stakeholders, I think that that definitely takes some of the potential confrontation, adversarialness out of the situation. Let's see. Keith asks, our QA department is also in charge of releasing software to our captive clients. Is this common? We don't typically mind being heavily involved in the quality cop role, since we will have to answer help calls from our beta clients. Do you see any problems with how we have this set up? Okay, so you say in charge of releasing software to captive clients, but then you said beta clients. Sounds like you're maybe writing software that's both used in-house and also sold. You're saying that you have to push back on releases because you're the one that takes the support calls. Well, okay, so in terms of having the support function and the QA function live in the same organization, I don't see a problem with that. Certainly, I've seen that situation before. Now, as far as the quality cop. You know, again, I'll go back to what I said with Mel. It's fraught with risk and pitfalls. You know, yeah, I mean, I can see your point that we are trying to save ourselves from, you know, a lot of very angry support calls. But the trouble is, again, that's your pain. And you're basically going to, you know, you're going to be a quality cop. You're basically saying that you're going to set yourself up to tell the development organization, no, you can't put that out into production because it's going to result in too many support calls for us. Well, again, you know, whose pain are we talking about there? So I think that's not necessarily going to do much of a job of motivating change on people's part. And I think you're putting yourself in an adversarial position. I mean, it does sound like you're in that spot, and maybe it's been defined that way. So getting yourself out of that spot might be tricky. But you know, I just think it, as I say, it's fraught with risk and you know, potential for getting into confrontational situations with people, adversarial situations that would be potentially avoidable. And I think potentially a rethink on this might be in order. Certainly, at the very least, going through that process that I talked about, you know, knowing the stakeholders, defining your objectives, you know, measuring how well you're meeting those objectives, making sure that you're in regular contact with people, following up. You know, I think I'd say definitely go through that. You know, if you're stuck with one of the objectives being enforce exit criteria, then okay, but you know, make sure that you've got all the political support that's necessary for that, because it is a risky situation. Monica asks, when working with an organization that has never had a formal QA team before, how do you educate stakeholders on what is required to ensure quality without being perceived as a process or quality cop? Well, Monica, I think you put your finger on it there, and that is education. You know, you're going to help them understand better what you can and can't do. So I think that conversation that I was talking about before of you know, knowing the stakeholders and discussing with them the objectives and collaborating with them on setting up a policy, that should really help you educate them as to, you know, what you can and can't do for them, and what their expectations would be. You know, to educate them about what the possibilities are. And these objectives will be, you know, externally visible things that relate to stuff that relate to attributes about the product or the process that they care about. So, you know, that's really where you want to focus their attention. They don't necessarily need to know sort of the internal sausage making, as it were, of how exactly you go about doing this stuff. You know, it's mostly just a matter of what objectives can be achieved and to what level in terms of effectiveness and efficiency. So I think that putting that test policy in place will be a good enabler for that conversation that you need to have. Let's see. Infias asks, what do you think about splitting QA into delivery and development oriented? So I'm going to assume that what you mean by development oriented would be somebody is a group that's focused on testing during development. Delivery being maybe people that are supporting the installation of the product into production environments. You know, there are a lot of different ways to organize a QA group, and you know, in some cases it goes well beyond QA. You know, as I was discussing a moment ago, you get these organizations that are you know, not just QA, but there's, I mean, the development services groups I've heard of where, you've got testing or QA. Sometimes it's testing, and then there's a separate QA group, and there's also a delivery team in their release engineering, configuration management. One of our clients is setting up a group like that right now, where they've got all sorts of ancillary functions in there. They have data and environments and configuration management and release management and testing and different levels of testing and support for UAT and so forth. So, certainly it's not unusual for us to see groups that are basically, everything but development and project management, and those live in separate groups. So a lot of different ways to set these up. I believe I talked about this in a webinar, Test Organizational Options. It was last summer, so you can find a recorded version of that webinar out on the website. Okay. So Anitra asks, would you please repeat the course code for PMI PDU credit? Certainly, one last time. The code is FETP100. RBCS's provider ID is 2986. And for those of you who might be listening to the recorded version of this webinar, please remember that these PDUs are available only for live attendance. Save your attendee confirmation email that when you get it, Anitra, because we did have somebody tell us they had been audited by PMI, and they had saved that email. And fortunately, we were able to help them out by finding the registration, or excuse me, the attendee information, and we're able to confirm that they had been there. But you don't want to count on that. Okay, well, we're just about out of time, so let me close this session and tell you a little bit more about the resources available through RBCS. We run these free webinar sessions once a month, so check our website, rbcs-us.com, to sign up. If you would like a special presentation for your company only of this webinar or any other topic, send us an email, info@rbcs-us.com, or you can contact us via our website. Sign up for our free newsletter. That's at rbcs-us.com. This will get you valuable discounts on consulting and training services, and a regular newsletter that includes a featured article on software testing and quality, along with news about RBCS and its partners and what we're up to. We're on Twitter at RBCS and on Facebook at RBCS-INC. Do remember to check your email over the next couple days. You might be the lucky winner of a free e-learning course from RBCS. Check out my blog at rbcs-us.com/blog. It's been a little quiet there lately, but that's just been because I've been busy like crazy for the last 6 months, but things seem to be kind of opening up a little bit. So send me post a comment on something I've written on the blog, or email me a topic that you'd like to discuss. It's info@rbcs-us.com. Include the word blog in your subject line. And check out our digital library. We have recordings of these webinars. We've got podcasts, and we've got videos. You can subscribe to the podcasts in the iTunes store, entering RBCS Podcasts into the search string. And we're also on the RBCS channel on YouTube. We offer these free resources as a service to the software testing community because at RBCS we are a not-just-for-profit company. This concludes the webinar. Thanks to all of you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you on other webinars in the future.